Imagine you are a security guard,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
but you are not just any security guard working a standard desk job in a lobby. You are stationed deep underground.
Oh, like a bunker.
Right, a highly classified, completely windowless installation. You have absolutely no access to the outside world down there.
This is a little claustrophobic.
Very.
Huh.
There is no internet connection. There is no television broadcasting the morning news. You don't even have a sliver of cell reception to check a weather app on your phone.
So completely isolated.
Completely. Your entire universe just consists of concrete walls and fluorescent lights. Your only daily interaction with the your one and only clue about the current reality up above is whether your boss, the director of the facility, brings an umbrella when they arrive for work each morning.
That is a brilliant setup.
Now, put yourself in that chair. How do you figure out the current reality of the weather outside when your only connection to it, the director's umbrella, is wildly imperfect?
Because it's a terrible sensor.
Right. Exactly. After all, maybe it's pouring rain up there and the director simply forgot the umbrella in their car.
Happens all the time.
Or maybe it's a beautiful sunny Tuesday and they just brought the umbrella along by accident because they were carrying a bunch of bags. Or maybe the forecast said rain, so they brought it. But the skies are actually clear.
The data is noisy.
Right. How do you build a reliable mental model of the world when your only source of information is noisy, flawed, and nothing is ever crystal clear?
That thought experiment is the absolute perfect way to anchor what we're exploring today. Because the scenario you just painted, it isn't just a quirky logic puzzle to pass the time.
Yeah.
It represents the fundamental underlying problem faced by any intelligent agent trying to make sense of a reality it cannot perfectly see.
And when we say intelligent agent, we're talking broad strokes here.
Very broad. I mean, anything from a human being trying to navigate a complex social situation to a self-driving car trying to navigate a chaotic intersection in a snowstorm.
Or even financial algorithms.
Exactly. High-frequency algorithms trying to predict the stock market based on fragmented news reports. All of them are stuck in their own metaphorical windowless rooms trying to guess if it's raining.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. If you are listening to this, you are our resident learner, and we have an incredibly dense but profoundly fascinating stack of research laid out in front of us today.
We really do.
Our mission is to decode the mathematics of perception. We are diving into Chapter 15, Probabilistic Reasoning Over Time. We are going to explore how we can interpret the present moment, understand the obscured past, and even attempt to predict the uncertain future.
All while relying on data that might actively be lying to us.
Right. It sounds like science fiction, but the math is very real.
Up until this point, in our broader understanding of systems and logic, we generally operate in what we call static worlds.
Static meaning still.
Right. Think about the process of diagnosing a mechanical failure, like a broken transmission in a car. When you pull that car into the garage and start working on it, whatever is broken essentially remains broken while you're trying to figure it out.
The gears aren't fixing themselves while I'm looking for a wrench.
Exactly. The evidence doesn't spontaneously shift beneath your hands. The state of the car is fixed, static, frozen in time for the duration of your diagnosis.
The puzzle pieces stay exactly where you put them.
They do. But the research we are diving into today forces us out of that comfortable garage and into dynamic worlds.
Okay, so a moving target.
Yes. Instead of a broken car sitting still, think about the immense complexity of treating a diabetic patient in an intensive care unit.
That's a completely different ballgame.
It is. You have evidence in front of you. Recent insulin doses administered by the nurses, the patient's food intake from earlier in the day, discrete blood sugar measurements taken every few hours.
But none of that stays still.
Exactly. The dynamic aspects are the entire problem here. Blood sugar levels fluctuate constantly, minute by minute, depending on unseen metabolic activity, the time of day, stress levels.
And how long it has been since a meal was digested.
Right. So to assess that patient's actual current state right now, based on a history of evidence that is essentially already out of date the moment it's collected.
You have to account for the flow of time itself.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you cannot simply look at the last blood sugar reading and assume that is the reality. To predict what will happen if we administer a new treatment, we have to mathematically model rapid, invisible changes over time.
We have to interpret an ever-changing present.
Yes, and understand a past we didn't fully observe and predict an entirely uncertain future. And we have to do all of that through medical sensors that, much like the director's umbrella, might occasionally give us a faulty reading.
Okay, let's unpack this, because even though we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence, algorithms, and probability matrices today, the concepts map so beautifully to human intuition.
We do this kind of probabilistic math in our heads every single day without realizing it.
We really do. So let's start at the very beginning. How do we even look at time mathematically? How do we take the continuous flow of reality and slice it up into something an algorithm or a human brain can actually process?
The foundational step in modeling a dynamic world is to stop looking at time as a smooth, unbroken river
Okay.
and start viewing the world as a sequence of discrete snapshots. We refer to these as time slices.
Like frames in a movie.
Exactly like that. Imagine setting up a camera and taking a photograph of the entire universe at regular fixed intervals. Depending on the problem you are trying to solve, that interval might be every day, every hour, or even every millisecond.
So the continuous flow is chopped up into these discrete steps.
Yes, and within each single time slice, within each photograph, we define a set of variables that describe the world at that exact moment.
Then we divide those variables into two very specific, very separate buckets.
Right.
We have the state variables and we have the evidence variables.
The separation between those two buckets is the core of everything we will discuss. Let's look at the state variables first.
Okay.
The state variables represent the hidden truth of the world. They represent what is actually happening in reality, regardless of whether we can see it or not.
So in the case of the underground security guard,
The state variable is the actual objective weather up on the surface. Is water falling from the clouds or not?
right?
We denote that mathematically as x sub, meaning the true state of the world at time t, which is whatever specific slice of time we are currently looking at.
Well, the second bucket contains the evidence variables, which I assume we denote as E sub t.
You got it.
These are the things we can actually observe from inside our windowless room. The director shaking off a wet umbrella.
Precisely.
Or in the hospital scenario, the state variable X sub t is the actual true concentration of glucose in the patient's bloodstream at 2 p.m.
And the evidence variable.
The E sub t, that's the digital number that pops up on the blood glucose monitor screen at 2 p.m.
What's fascinating here is that the framework forces us to explicitly separate the two concepts. The actual blood sugar in the human body and the number printed on the plastic machine are treated as entirely distinct mathematical entities.
Because they aren't the same thing.
No, they aren't. Separating the hidden truth from the observable evidence is how we build a system capable of dealing with the fact that sensors lie, machines break, and humans forget things.
We never assume the evidence is the reality.
Never. The evidence is merely a clue pointing toward the reality.
So we have these individual snapshots of time, slice 1, slice 2, slice 3. Each one contains a hidden truth and a piece of observable evidence.
Right.
But a stack of isolated photographs doesn't tell a story. How do we string them together? How do we mathematically model the flow of time from one slice to the next?
That is the big question.
Because sitting here thinking about it, if I want to know with absolute certainty if it's going to rain today, it feels like I would need to analyze the entire history of the world's weather patterns.
It does feel that way.
The ocean currents from last year, the butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil a decade ago, all leading up to this exact millisecond.
And that intuition highlights the immediate computational nightmare of temporal reasoning.
It's just too much data.
Way too much. If our transition model, which is the mathematical rule we use to calculate the probability of the current state based on past states, if that model required looking at the entire unbounded history of the universe, our computers would melt.
Literally.
An algorithm would grind to a halt instantly if it had to query an infinitely growing database of past events just to guess if it should bring a raincoat today.
So how do they avoid that?
To avoid this catastrophic computational explosion, we utilize a brilliant, necessary shortcut known as a Markov assumption.
Ah, named after Andrei Markov, the Russian mathematician who did a lot of this foundational work back in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, right?
That's the one.
What exactly did he assume that saved us all this computational power?
The Markov assumption fundamentally states that the current state of the world depends only on a finite, fixed number of previous states.
Okay.
It suggests that the recent past contains all the information you need to predict the immediate future, rendering the deep past mathematically irrelevant.
We don't need the entire history of the universe.
Exactly. We just need a specific, limited window of time.
So if we apply a first-order Markov process, we are boldly assuming that the current state of the world depends only on the immediately preceding state.
Right. Just one step back.
Today's true weather depends entirely on yesterday's true weather. And by extension, yesterday's weather contains all the relevant accumulated influence of the day before yesterday and the day before that.
It's all baked in.
We assume that simply knowing yesterday provides enough comprehensive data to make tomorrow conditionally independent of all the days that came before.
That is the essence of a first-order Markov model. The chain of dependence goes back exactly one step.
What if that's not enough?
Well, if you wanted slightly more context, you could use a second-order Markov process, which dictates that today's weather depends on the specific combination of yesterday's weather and the weather from the day before yesterday.
It's like saying, if it rained yesterday and it rained the day before, the chance of rain today is incredibly high.
Exactly.
But even with that fantastic shortcut, where we only look back 1 or 2 days, I see a glaring logistical problem.
Well,
If time goes on infinitely into the future, day after day, year after year, do we need to write a brand new specific probability rule for every single day on the calendar? Does January 4th have a different mathematical equation than September 12th?
to solve that, the models rely on a second major assumption. We assume that the changes in the world are governed by a stationary process.
Hold on, a stationary process sounds like an oxymoron. We spent the whole beginning of this deep dive establishing that we're in a dynamic, ever-changing world. How can the process be stationary?
It is a vital distinction in the terminology. In a stationary process, the state of the world itself is absolutely changing. It is raining on Monday, it is sunny on Tuesday, it is cloudy on Wednesday.
The state fluctuates.
Yes. But the underlying laws governing those fluctuations, the fundamental physics of the system, do not alter over time. The transition model remains fixed.
Oh, I see.
Therefore, the statistical probability that a rainy day follows another rainy day remains mathematically identical, whether we are looking at a sequence of days in 1995 or a sequence of days in 2045.
Assuming, of course, for the sake of the base model, that we haven't built complex seasonal variables or long-term climate change shifts into our specific matrix.
Exactly. The beauty of the stationary process is that we only have to specify one single set of rules, one conditional probability table, and we can apply it endlessly, iteratively, across the infinite expanse of time.
That elegantly handles the hidden truth, the weather transitioning to the weather. But what about the evidence bucket? What about the umbrellas?
Right. The sensors.
Does the fact that the director brought an umbrella on Wednesday depend on whether they brought an umbrella on Tuesday?
That brings us to the sensor Markov assumption. In these models, we assume that the evidence, the sensor reading the umbrella, depends entirely and only on the current state.
So just today's weather?
Yes. The director walking through the underground bunker doors with a dripping wet umbrella today is caused solely by the fact that water is falling from the sky today.
It doesn't matter what the weather was yesterday.
Nope. It does not matter if they brought an umbrella yesterday.
No.
The current state of the world causes the current sensor value.
I really appreciate how the research highlights the direction of dependence here because it can feel counterintuitive at first glance.
How so?
Well, if you were drawing this out as a diagram, the arrows go from the hidden state pointing toward the sensor. Because the state of the world causes the sensor to react, the rain literally causes the director to pick up the umbrella. The physical reality generates the data. But when we perform inference, when we act as the detective stuck in the windowless room, our logic has to flow in the exact opposite direction. We observe the umbrella, and we reason backward against the arrow to infer the existence of the rain.
It is the fundamental difference between how the universe generates reality and how an intelligent agent attempts to perceive it.
Beautifully said.
The universe flows forward from cause to effect. We observe the effect, and we mathematically paddle upstream to calculate the probability of the cause.
Paddling upstream is hard work.
It is, but we have to be incredibly careful here. We've established these beautiful, clean Markov assumptions to make the math workable, but the real world is messy.
Always.
And sometimes our Markov assumptions are leaky. They fail us in spectacular ways.
This is where things get really interesting, because the source material brings up a phenomenal example of a leaky model. Let's step away from the weather for a second.
Okay.
Imagine we are tracking an autonomous robot wandering around randomly on a large, flat, two-dimensional warehouse floor.
A Roomba, basically.
Exactly, a giant industrial Roomba. Now, if you are an engineer setting this up, you might logically think that knowing the robot's current XY position and its current velocity is a perfectly sufficient first-order Markov model.
Sure.
You have the position, you have the speed, you have the direction. You can use basic high school physics to calculate exactly where it will be in the next time slice.
Under ideal conditions, yes. That first-order assumption holds perfectly. But what if the robot is entirely battery-powered?
Which it is.
As the battery slowly starts to drain, it systematically alters the physical performance of the robot. The motors lose torque, and the velocity begins to drop, even if the robot is trying to maintain a constant speed.
It gets sluggish.
Right. Now think about what determines the battery level. The battery level at any given second depends on the entire exhaustive past history of the robot's movements since it was last charged.
Every turn, every acceleration.
How many evasive maneuvers did it make? How much power did it exert accelerating? Because the current battery drain relies on this deep, accumulated history stretching far beyond the previous time slice, our neat, simple first-order Markov assumption about position and velocity is suddenly completely violated.
The model no longer accurately describes the physics of the world.
It starts predicting the robot will be 10 feet further ahead than it actually is.
So how do we fix a leaky model? Do we throw our hands up and say the math is broken? Do we abandon the Markov assumption entirely?
No, we don't abandon the framework, we adapt it. When faced with a violation of the Markov assumption, we generally have two choices.
Okay, what's option one?
The first choice is to increase the order of the Markov process. We could force the algorithm to look further back in time, perhaps tracking the last 50 velocity readings, to implicitly deduce that a gradual slowdown is occurring due to battery drain.
But that quickly leads us right back toward the computational explosion we were trying to avoid.
Exactly. The second, vastly superior solution is to expand our definition of the world. We explicitly add battery level as a brand new hidden state variable within our time slice. By adding the battery level to our photograph of the present moment, the state becomes mathematically self-sufficient again. We have captured the complex physics of the draining power source within the current time slice, effectively restoring the integrity of our first-order Markov assumption.
So the position tomorrow depends on the position today, the velocity today, and the battery level today.
Exactly. We patched the leak.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Let's take a breath and survey the foundation we've just built. We have sliced the continuous flow of time into manageable, discrete chunks. We have separated the hidden, objective truth of the universe from the noisy, flawed evidence we gather through our sensors, and we have established the Markov assumptions to keep the mathematical calculations from spiraling into infinity.
That's the foundation.
Now, the big question, what do we actually do with these models? Once we have this framework, how does an AI or a human use it to survive?
We perform inference. We use the mathematics of probability to draw conclusions. And within this framework of temporal reasoning, there are four fundamental pillars, four core tasks that these models are specifically built to solve.
The four pillars.
They are filtering, prediction, smoothing, and finding the most likely explanation.
Let's dive deep into the very first pillar, filtering. The literature also refers to this as state estimation. At its core, this is the act of figuring out where we are right now, given the absolute totality of the evidence we have collected up to this very second. If I am the security guard stuck in the bunker, filtering is the process of asking my brain, given every single time I've seen the director carry an umbrella over the last 3 months, combined with what I saw them carry in today, what is the exact probability that water is falling on the roof right this very second?
And the way we compute filtering is a triumph of algorithmic design, because it relies on a concept called recursive estimation.
Recursive estimation.
Consider the alternative. If we want to know the true state of the weather on day 50, we absolutely do not want to recalculate the entire history of evidence, starting from day 1, then day 2, all the way to day 50, every single time a new day dawns.
Yeah, it would take forever.
If an algorithm had to reprocess its entire life history every time it received a new sensor ping, it would get slower and slower with every passing moment until it was completely paralyzed by its own memories.
It's like trying to keep a running total of your grocery bill in your head. You don't recount every single item in the cart every time you add a new box of cereal. You just take the old total and you add the price of the cereal.
An agent with limited processing power couldn't survive if it couldn't summarize its past.
That is the perfect analogy.
Instead of recounting the cart, we use a recursive formula. We take our filtered belief from yesterday, which is a single mathematical probability distribution that already perfectly and completely encapsulates all the evidence gathered from the deep past up to yesterday.
It's a compressed file of the past.
Exactly. We take that condensed belief and we push it forward one step into the future using our transition model. This creates an initial prediction for today's weather before the director even walks in the door.
Okay.
Then, when the director arrives, we update that prediction using today's fresh evidence, the presence or absence of the umbrella.
Push forward, then update.
It is an elegant two-part process. Project the old belief forward, then update it with the new data. We visualize this mathematically as a forward message that propagates constantly through time, being continuously molded by the laws of physics and the relentless arrival of new information.
And because we only ever need yesterday's condensed summary and today's new data, the space and time it takes for a computer to process this update remains completely constant, whether it is analyzing day 2 of its existence or day 2000.
Constant time. It's beautiful.
That covers filtering, understanding the present. What about the second pillar?
Prediction? Prediction is essentially filtering stripped of the update step. It is the act of looking into the future without the benefit of new evidence. Because naturally the future hasn't happened yet, so there are no sensors to read.
No umbrellas from tomorrow.
Right. We take our current, highly refined belief state about the world today, and we simply apply the transition model to it, pushing the probabilities one step forward into tomorrow. And then we apply the transition model again, pushing it to the day after tomorrow.
We are asking the system, given everything I know with absolute certainty today, what is the probability that it will be raining exactly 3 days from now?
But there's a massive looming catch when we try to look too far ahead, isn't there? The research spends considerable time outlining this concept of a mixing time and how it leads to a stationary distribution.
Yes, the mathematics of prediction carry a harsh truth about the limits of foresight. If you attempt to predict the state of the world too far out into the future, say, you are trying to guess the weather on day 50, based solely on the fact that the director brought an umbrella on day 1, the specific probabilities eventually just wash out.
They flatten.
They settle into a fixed, immovable baseline. Let's assume your baseline climate model dictates that it rains, on average, 50% of the days in a year. As you push your prediction further and further into the future, step by step, the influence of today's specific evidence dilutes.
Day 1 stops mattering.
Eventually, no matter how certain you were about day 1, your predictive algorithm for day 50 will simply output a 50-50 probability.
Because the uncertainty compounds with every step. The further out you cast your gaze, the more the actual specific future becomes utterly obscured by the sheer volume of accumulating possibilities.
It could rain, then not rain, then rain again, branching infinitely.
Exactly. The amount of time it takes for your specific, sharp prediction to dissolve completely into that vague baseline average is what we call the mixing time. So, trying to predict the actual state of the world significantly beyond the mixing time of your model is essentially a mathematical impossibility. You are just guessing the average.
The future eventually becomes unknowable to the algorithm.
It does.
Now, let's pivot and look at the third task, smoothing. If filtering is asking, where am I right now, and prediction is asking, where am I going, smoothing is the process of asking, where was I in the past?
It is the mathematical computation of the probability distribution over a specific past state, given all the evidence collected up to the present moment.
It is the mathematical equivalent of the phrase, hindsight is 20/20.
It is. Smoothing provides a significantly more accurate estimate of what happened in the past than the filtering algorithm could possibly have provided at the time the event was actually occurring.
Why?
Because the smoothing algorithm has access to future evidence that the filtering algorithm did not.
Let's make this incredibly concrete by bringing back our security guard and the umbrella. Let's walk through a 3-day scenario.
Okay.
On day 1, the director walks in carrying the umbrella. I run my filtering math, and I calculate a relatively high belief that it is raining on day 1. But there's still doubt, right? Maybe they just brought it by accident.
Sure.
But then on day 2, they bring the umbrella again. And on day 3, they bring the umbrella a third time. Now, because I know the transition model, I know that weather systems tend to persist over multiple days, that future evidence from Tuesday and Wednesday retroactively reaches back through time to alter my perception of Monday.
Because it's a storm system.
Exactly. The sustained presence of umbrellas in the future makes me even more confident that my initial assessment of day 1 was absolutely correct. The subsequent days provide retroactive mathematical confirmation.
That is exactly how it works conceptually.
Yeah.
And computationally, we achieve this temporal hindsight using what is called the forward-backward algorithm. Remember that forward message we use to continuously filter the present? Well, to perform smoothing, we run that forward filtering pass through time. But we cache or save the mathematical results at every single time step along the way.
Like leaving breadcrumbs.
We create a record of our initial filtered beliefs. Then, once we reach the present moment, we generate a new backward message. This backward message starts at the present and sweeps backward through time, step by step, updating and refining our cached past beliefs based on the totality of our modern knowledge.
Sweeping back over the breadcrumbs.
By mathematically multiplying the cached forward message with the sweeping backward message at any given point in the past, we can smooth out the entire historical sequence. And brilliantly, we can do this in linear time, meaning the computational cost scales efficiently with the length of the history.
So we have built a system that can filter the noise of the present, predict the hazy future, and smooth out our understanding of the past. That leaves the fourth pillar. What is the most likely explanation?
Finding the most likely explanation is a subtly different but incredibly powerful concept. This isn't just about finding the isolated probability of a single state on a single specific day, like we do in smoothing.
Okay, so it's not just a snapshot.
No. This task requires finding the single, continuous, unbroken sequence of events that is mathematically most likely to have generated your entire unbroken history of observations.
I want to make sure the distinction is clear here. Let's say we have a 5-day sequence of evidence, Monday through Friday. The director brings the umbrella, brings it, forgets it, brings it, brings it.
True, false, true.
Yes, exactly. We want to know the true weather. Did it rain for 5 days straight and the director just absentmindedly forgot the umbrella on Wednesday? Or did it rain for 2 days, clear up for 2 days, and they inexplicably brought the umbrella on Thursday just in case before it rained again on Friday? Because there are 2 states, rain or no rain, over 5 days, there are 32 distinct, entirely possible weather sequences that could have occurred. We aren't just asking what happened on Wednesday. We want the algorithm to hand us the single most probable complete narrative path out of those 32 options.
And to extract that definitive narrative, we deploy the Viterbi algorithm.
Viterbi.
What is truly elegant about the Viterbi algorithm is how it conceptualizes these 32 possible sequences as branching paths through a massive graph. When we perform standard filtering or smoothing, the math requires us to sum together the probabilities of different paths that lead to the same state.
We add them up.
But the Viterbi algorithm doesn't sum, it maximizes. As it steps forward through time, from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday, for every possible state it encounters, it calculates and strictly remembers only the single most likely path that leads to that specific state.
It throws away the runners-up.
It discards the less likely routes entirely. It carries these optimal winning paths forward, recursively extending them day by day. When it finally reaches Friday, the end of the sequence, it looks at the final states, picks the one sitting at the end of the highest overall probability chain, and then simply traces that optimal unbroken path backward to see exactly which sequence of events got it there.
I always picture the Viterbi algorithm like a hyper-intelligent rat solving a maze. But instead of just wandering at every single intersection, it calculates the absolute fastest, most efficient route it took to get to that specific intersection from the start.
And it writes that route down.
So by the time the rat finally reaches the exit of the maze, it doesn't have to guess how it got there. It already holds the complete map of the mathematically perfect route in its hand.
That is a remarkably accurate visualization. The Viterbi algorithm is constantly pruning the suboptimal narrative paths as it moves forward, ensuring that when it reaches the end, the most likely explanation is immediately apparent.
So filtering, prediction, smoothing, and the Viterbi algorithm, these 4 mathematical operations form the absolute bedrock of how intelligent systems reason over time.
They absolutely do.
Okay, we have the theoretical foundation locked in. Here is where it gets really interesting. Let's take these abstract concepts and look at a specific, concrete mathematical framework that implements these exact operations to solve real problems. A massive portion of the research we are analyzing focuses on hidden Markov models, or HMMs.
An HMM is essentially the purest, simplest flavor of the temporal models we have been discussing. The defining, inescapable characteristic of an HMM is that the entire hidden state of the process must be described by a single, discrete, random variable.
Wait, let me pause you there. Discrete means countable, distinct states. Like rolling a die, it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3. It can't be a 2.75.
Correct.
So our underground umbrella world is a perfect HMM because the hidden state is just rain. It's discrete. It's either true or false, a 1 or a 0. But the real world is rarely that simple. What if we are trying to track the autonomous warehouse robot we mentioned earlier? We need to know its X coordinate on the grid, and we need to know its Y coordinate. Those are 2 completely separate variables. Can we use an HMM for that?
You can, but only if you force the math to comply with the rules of an HMM. If you have multiple distinct state variables, an HMM requires you to mathematically combine all of them into one single massive mega variable.
A mega variable.
Let's say the warehouse floor is a grid. The x-coordinate has 10 possible values and the y-coordinate has 10 possible values. To use an HMM, you compress those together into a mega variable that has exactly 100 possible distinct states, with each state representing a unique, specific combination of x and y coordinates on the floor.
Now, as someone looking at this from the outside, that seems wildly inefficient. Why would we force everything into a single bloated, discrete variable? What is the practical benefit of doing that?
It's all about the math.
As the research points out, the benefit lies in the sheer, undeniable mathematical elegance that unlocks. Because we restrict the world to only one discrete state variable, we can translate all of these complex theoretical algorithms into incredibly fast, incredibly simple matrix multiplication.
This is where the computer science truly shines. If your mega variable has a total of s possible states, like the 100 squares on our grid, your transition model, the rules of how the robot moves, translates beautifully into an S by S matrix.
A 100 by 100 grid of numbers.
The mathematical probability of the robot moving from state I to state J is simply stored as a single number in a specific cell within that matrix. It is a giant lookup table. Furthermore, the sensor model, which dictates how accurate the robot's cameras are, translates into a diagonal matrix.
So it's all just grids of numbers.
And suddenly, those complex forward messages and backward messages we talked about for filtering and smoothing, they stop being abstract concepts and become simple mathematical vectors. That recursive filtering equation that sounded so daunting earlier, it boils down to a computer taking a vector and multiplying it by a matrix.
And computers love multiplying matrices.
That is an operation that modern computer processors are optimized to perform at blinding, unfathomable speeds. It requires very little memory, and the space it takes up remains entirely constant.
Let's ground this matrix math with what is undeniably the most compelling example in the entire chapter, the problem of robot localization.
Oh, this is a great one.
I want everyone listening to visualize this scenario perfectly. Imagine a small robotic vacuum cleaner dropped randomly into an enclosed maze. The maze consists of exactly 42 empty square tiles it can move onto. When the robot is turned on, it has absolutely no idea where it is. It doesn't know its starting coordinates. So its internal initial belief state is a perfectly uniform distribution. It assumes it has an equal 1 in 42 chance of being located on any given square in the entire maze.
Now, we give the robot a very simple transition model to dictate its behavior. At every time slice, it chooses to move to an adjacent square completely at random.
So it wanders.
If it is sitting on a square completely surrounded by 4 empty squares, north, south, east, and west, it calculates a 25% mathematical probability of moving in any of those 4 directions during the next step.
That's the physics. Now for the perception. The robot is equipped with 4 sensors, one pointing in each cardinal direction, north, south, east, and west. The sensors are extremely basic. They only do one thing. They detect if there is a solid wall immediately adjacent to the robot in that specific direction.
Simple enough.
But here's the catch. The engineers bought the cheapest sensors available. Every single sensor has a 20% error rate. It will hallucinate a wall where there is empty space, or it will fail to see a solid wall right in front of it, exactly 1 out of every 5 times it takes a reading.
This setup introduces a staggering mathematical reality about combined probabilities. If you have 4 independent sensors and each individual sensor is wrong 20% of the time, the laws of probability dictate that the combined composite reading of all 4 sensors is going to be completely incorrect a shocking 59% of the time.
Wait, 59%?
Let that sink in. More often than not, nearly 6 out of every 10 times the robot tries to look at its surroundings, it is being fed a fundamentally flawed, inaccurate picture of its immediate reality.
That's terrible.
From an engineering standpoint, you would assume a robot operating with 60% garbage data would be hopelessly permanently lost.
But it's not. This was the biggest aha moment for me when reading through the simulations in the text. There is a graph plotting the robot's localization error over time. And it shows that even with a crippling 59% error rate on its composite sensor readings, the robot is able to pinpoint its exact, true location within the maze, narrowing it down to just a couple of squares, after moving a mere 25 times.
It's almost magical.
How on earth does an algorithm that is constantly being lied to figure out exactly where it is?
It achieves this seemingly impossible feat because the hidden Markov model is not just looking at a single isolated snapshot in time. It is rigorously integrating evidence over time, and crucially, it is heavily relying on the fundamental unbreakable physics of the maze itself.
The solid walls.
The maze has solid walls. The transition model explicitly knows that the robot cannot walk through a solid wall. Let's imagine a scenario. The faulty sensors experience a massive glitch and temporarily convince the robot's internal model that it is sitting perfectly in the top right corner of the maze. But on the very next step, the robot moves north, and its bump sensor registers no collision. It doesn't hit a wall.
No.
Now, the transition model knows that moving north from the top right corner of the maze is physically impossible. There's an impenetrable boundary there.
It has to hit a wall if it's really in the corner.
Therefore, despite what the sensor said a moment ago, the HMM instantaneously and drastically drops the mathematical probability of being in the top right corner to 0.
Over a continuous sequence of 25 random moves, the rigid, unyielding physical constraints of the maze's architecture systematically rule out the impossible narrative paths.
The Viterbi path, essentially.
Yes, the single most likely path. Despite the constant noise and confusion from the sensors, inevitably and beautifully converges on the robot's true physical location.
It is just staggering to think about. The algorithm uses the strict history of its own movements and the rules of physics to completely override the noise of its present perception.
It's a triumph of logic over flawed data. But, as incredible as hidden Markov models are for solving grid mazes, they have a devastating breaking point. The research calls it out perfectly, and it's something we touched on earlier.
The mega-variable problem.
What happens if we decide we want our little vacuum robot to track not just its location on the 42 squares, but also its current heading, meaning whether it is physically facing north, south, east, or west?
Well, as we established, an HMM requires a single discrete mega-variable. So our variable has to expand to absorb the new information. 42 physical squares multiplied by 4 possible headings equals a new total of 168 distinct states.
This doesn't sound too bad.
The transition matrix required to compute the math is now 168 squared, which gives us roughly 28,000 individual entries. For a modern desktop computer, crunching a 28,000 cell matrix every fraction of a second is still very manageable.
But let's push it. Let's remember it's a vacuum cleaner. It's supposed to clean. Let's add dirt to the simulation. Let's say every single one of those 42 squares can now possess a secondary state. It can either be clean or it can be dirty.
Now the architecture completely collapses. Your single mega variable must account for every conceivable permutation of dirt across the entire grid simultaneously. That requires calculating 2 to the power of 42 possible dirt configurations.
Which is a huge number.
You then have to multiply that massive number by the 168 location and heading states. Suddenly, overnight, your elegant little transition matrix balloons into a monstrous entity possessing more than 10 to the 29th power individual entry.
And computers break.
There is not a computer on Earth, nor will there be for a very long time, capable of performing real-time matrix multiplication on a grid that large. It is computationally impossible. This highlights the fatal flaw of the system. HMMs break down completely and catastrophically when the domain of the problem becomes too complex. They suffer from an inescapable exponential explosion in mathematical complexity.
Not only do they suffer from that exponential explosion, but HMMs possess another severe limitation. They only function for discrete variables, countable, isolated things, grid squares, true or false states, clean or dirty.
Right.
But human reality is rarely constrained to a neat grid. What if I'm a wildlife biologist and I need an algorithm to track the erratic flight path of a small bird darting through dense jungle foliage at dusk?
You can't put a bird on a grid?
Or what if I am a World War II radar operator trying to mathematically project the path of a wandering blip on a cathode ray screen? Or an economist trying to track the fluid, ever-shifting momentum of the Consumer Confidence Index? These are continuous variables, positioned in a three-dimensional space, velocity, economic sentiment. You cannot chop the open sky into a billion little discrete boxes to run an HMM.
And that precise limitation forces us out of the discrete world and takes us into section 4 of our exploration, the continuous world, and the introduction of a mathematical masterpiece engineered by Rudolf Kalman.
The Kalman filter.
We're talking about the Kalman filter.
Okay, so the HMM matrix shatters if we try to apply it to the bird in the jungle. We desperately need a new mathematical model that can natively handle continuous variables smoothly.
Exactly. And to achieve this, the Kalman filter abandons the idea of discrete states entirely and instead relies on the mathematics of continuous probability density, specifically utilizing linear Gaussian distributions.
Gaussian meaning...
For those who might not have taken a statistics class recently, you might know a Gaussian distribution better by its colloquial name, a bell curve. The core assumption of the Kalman filter is that our hidden state, let's say the precise altitude and velocity of the bird, is not represented by a single definitive point in space, but rather by a smooth, sloping Gaussian bell curve of probabilities.
Okay, I can picture that.
The absolute highest point of the curve, the center, the mean, represents where the algorithm believes the bird most likely is. The width or spread of the curve, the variance, represents the algorithm's level of uncertainty. A tall, skinny bell curve means the system is very confident. A flat, wide bell curve means the system is highly uncertain.
Okay, I understand the Gaussian part of the name now, but the literature specifically calls them linear Gaussian models. What makes it linear?
The linear aspect dictates the rules of the transition model. It means that the mathematical function used to calculate the next state must be a straight linear equation to which we add a little bit of Gaussian noise.
Give me an example.
For example, if I know the bird's exact position and its exact velocity today, I use a simple linear equation position plus velocity times time to find its projected position tomorrow. But because the world is chaotic, I add a little calculated bell curve of noise to that prediction to account for an unpredictable gust of wind or a random twitch of the wings.
What is it about this specific, highly constrained setup, linear equations and bell curves that makes the Kalman filter so famous? The research uses words like elegant and powerful repeatedly when describing it.
Because it exploits what can only be described as a magical property of Gaussian mathematics. If your current belief state about the world is a perfect Gaussian bell curve, and your transition model is a linear equation with Gaussian noise, your prediction for the next time slice is mathematically guaranteed to also be a perfect, flawlessly smooth Gaussian bell curve. The shape holds. And when you subsequently update that prediction using a sensor model that is also subject to linear Gaussian noise, the final filtered result, the posterior belief, is also a single, neat, mathematically perfect Gaussian bell curve. It is an entirely closed, self-sustaining mathematical loop.
Why does that closed loop matter so much? Why is maintaining that shape so critical to the engineers?
Because if we attempted to use almost any other kind of mathematical probability distribution to represent these continuous variables, as we pushed them forward through time and updated them with noisy sensors, the mathematical formulas required to describe the shape of the probability would grow increasingly distorted, fragmented, and infinitely more complex.
It would get jagged.
The math would grow without bound until the computer simply ran out of memory trying to calculate the curves. But the Kalman filter, because the math guarantees it remains a perfect Gaussian, never grows in complexity. You never have to track the shape of the curve. You only ever have to compute two single numbers at every time step, the new mean and the new variance.
The center and the width.
Because of this, the algorithm runs incredibly fast, taking up almost no memory, effectively forever.
Okay, I want to unpack the actual update equation that calculates that new mean, because here is where it gets incredibly cool from a conceptual standpoint. When the radar tower gets a ping and gives us a new observation of an airplane's location, how does the Kalman filter combine its internal prediction with that new sensor reading to find the actual truth?
It's remarkably simple.
The math outlined in the research boils down to something so beautifully, fundamentally intuitive. It is, at its core, just a weighted average.
That is precisely what it is. The newly calculated estimate of the plane's true position is simply a weighted average of the internal prediction and the fresh observation. And the specific weight, the slider, that determines which of those two sources of information gets prioritized is governed by a calculation known as the Kalman gain matrix.
The Kalman gain. It essentially acts as a highly intelligent, automated judge that decides who to trust.
Exactly. Let's say the radar sensor is experiencing heavy atmospheric interference from a thunderstorm. The mathematical variance, the noise level of the sensor, shoots up. The Kalman gain looks at that high variance and mathematically declares this new observation is highly unreliable. I am going to weigh my own internal prediction much, much higher than the sensor data.
Because the sensor is basically blind in the storm.
Right. But conversely, let's say the airplane suddenly starts executing wild, unpredictable, evasive maneuvers. The transition noise skyrockets because the physics model can't predict the pilot's erratic choices. But the radar, meanwhile, has a perfect clear lock on the plane.
The tables have turned.
In that scenario, the Kalman gain shifts the balance entirely, declaring, my internal prediction is currently useless. I am going to trust the radar sensor almost entirely.
It is an exquisite, automated, mathematically optimal trust weighting system. It constantly evaluates its own uncertainty against the uncertainty of its tools. And there is an even more impressive feature hidden in the math.
Oh, the offline calculation.
Yes. The update equation that calculates the variance, meaning the calculation that determines exactly how uncertain we are about our estimate, is actually completely mathematically independent of the new observation itself.
It's separated.
The uncertainty calculation only depends on the static known noise levels of the physical environment and the physical sensors. Because of this separation, an engineer can actually pre-calculate the entire sequence of variance values offline days before the system is even turned on. This makes the live, online tracking calculations required in the field incredibly lightweight and lightning fast.
It's no wonder they use Kalman filters for absolutely everything. They use them for the radar tracking of commercial aircraft, acoustic tracking of submarines deep underwater, visual tracking algorithms in smartphone cameras, reconstructing deep ocean currents from satellite telemetry, and even attempting to track the momentum of national economies.
It's everywhere.
But as revolutionary as the Kalman filter is, it possesses a glaring, fatal flaw of its own. Let's go back to our wildlife biologist tracking the bird in the jungle. Let's say the Kalman filter has a perfect lock on the bird, tracking it smoothly. But then the bird flies directly, at high speed, toward the massive trunk of a mahogany tree.
Oh.
If the system is running a standard Kalman filter, because it is strictly constrained by linear mechanics and the rigid shape of a single Gaussian distribution, the algorithm will simply confidently predict that the bird is going to continue flying on a straight line directly into the solid wood of the tree trunk. The mean of the Gaussian bell curve will be centered perfectly inside the tree.
Because a linear equation simply cannot model a sudden, conscious, evasive decision to swerve.
Exactly. The mathematics of the real world, and particularly biological systems, are often highly nonlinear. A bird's split-second decision to veer sharply left or sharply right, a decision that depends on fractions of an inch of visual perception, is a deeply nonlinear response. A linear equation cannot capture it.
So how do they fix it?
To attempt to patch this flaw, engineers developed a variant called the Extended Kalman filter, or EKF. The EKF attempts to mathematically smooth over the problem by treating a nonlinear system as if it were locally linear just within the tiny area right around the current mean. It's a clever mathematical trick, and it works reasonably well for smooth, well-behaved systems that only deviate slightly from a straight line.
But the EKF still completely fails when faced with abrupt, violent, evasive maneuvers, right? For those extreme scenarios, the research introduces an even more complex solution, the switching Kalman filter.
The logic behind the switching Kalman filter is straightforward, but computationally heavy. If a single mathematical model cannot adequately capture both straight, cruising flight and violent and evasive turns, the solution is to run multiple entirely separate Kalman filters simultaneously in parallel.
Okay.
You have one filter operating under a physics transition model that assumes straight, level flight. A second filter operates continuously under a mathematical model of a sharp high G left turn. A third filter models a sharp right turn.
So it's hedging its bets.
At every fraction of a second, the overarching system calculates predictions for all three distinct models, compares them against the incoming sensor data, and uses a weighted sum based on which specific filter's prediction most accurately matches reality at that exact moment.
So it's like having 3 different expert navigators in your head, all screaming different predictions at you, and you simply choose to listen to the one whose prediction just happened to come true a millisecond ago.
That's a great way to look at it.
But wait, if we pause and look at the architecture of the switching Kalman filter, we are running multiple parallel models based on distinct, discrete states like maneuver type, straight, maneuver type, left turn. But we are simultaneously trying to track continuous variables like exact physical position and velocity.
We are.
It sounds like we are forcefully mashing the discrete world of HMMs and the continuous world of Kalman filters together.
We are building hybrid systems. And doing so effectively takes us entirely out of the restrictive realms of pure HMMs and pure Kalman filters, and leads us into the massive, sprawling landscape of dynamic Bayesian networks, or DBNs.
Okay, let's unpack this new acronym. What exactly is a DBN?
A dynamic Bayesian network is a vastly more flexible mathematical framework that can theoretically represent almost any temporal probability model you can imagine. In fact, if you look at the underlying mathematics, both hidden Markov models and Kalman filters are technically just special, highly restricted subcases of the overarching DBN framework.
Let's contrast them to understand why we need them. When we talked about HMMs and our vacuum robot, we highlighted how the math forced us to combine every piece of information location heading dirt into one giant unmanageable mega variable, which caused the exponential explosion.
Yes.
The DBN philosophy is the exact opposite. A DBN embraces the inherent sparseness of reality. Instead of crushing everything into one variable with trillions of microscopic states, a DBN meticulously factors the world into separate, distinct variables. We create an isolated node for position. We create a node for velocity, a node for battery level, a node for dirt sensor status.
And then, crucially, we draw specific causal mathematical links between them. We draw an arrow from velocity to position because speed affects where you go. We draw an arrow from battery level to velocity because low power causes the motor to slow down.
It's mapping the logic.
By factoring the state space like this and explicitly defining the limited causal relationships, the transition model requires vastly fewer mathematical parameters to operate.
Give me a sense of the scale of that savings.
To put that in perspective, if you were trying to model a system with 20 simple Boolean true or false state variables, an HMM transition matrix would require calculating and storing roughly 1 trillion separate probabilities. A factored dynamic Bayesian network modeling the exact same 20 variables but taking advantage of the sparse causal links might only require calculating 160 probabilities.
Wow.
It fundamentally architecturally solves the exponential space problem that doomed HMMs.
It's an incredibly elegant way to model real-world chaos. I want to spend a significant amount of time here discussing a specific scenario presented in the research, the battery sensor dilemma.
This is a classic.
It is such a profoundly perfect encapsulation of why artificial intelligence so often fails in the real world and the ingenious ways engineers try to teach algorithms about human reality. Let's set the stage. Our autonomous robot has a digital battery meter. The meter outputs discrete readings ranging from 0 to 5. The robot is currently sitting completely idle in the corner of the room. For 20 consecutive time steps from T1 to T20, the meter reads exactly 5.
So it's fully charged.
The internal model is perfectly confident the battery is full. Then, suddenly, instantaneously, on step T21, the meter drops and reads 0. What happens inside the robot's brain?
To understand the failure, we have to look at the error model running the sensor. If the engineers equipped the robot with a simple standard Gaussian error model, that mathematical model explicitly assumes that massive extreme measurement errors are astronomically rare events. Small fluctuations are common, but a drop from 5 to 0 is statistically nearly impossible.
Right, because it's a bell curve. The tails are very thin.
Therefore, when the algorithm receives the 0 reading, it runs the probabilities. It concludes that the mathematical likelihood of the sensor malfunctioning that severely is vastly lower than the probability that the physical battery simply, inexplicably, instantaneously drained to absolute 0.
So it trusts the sensor over the physics.
Consequently, the robot's internal belief state plummets. It updates its reality. It believes it is entirely dead.
It panics. Even though it's sitting perfectly still and hasn't moved a motor, the math forces it to believe an impossibility. Let's say it reads 0 twice, at T21 and T22. It becomes absolutely mathematically certain its battery is empty and prepares to shut down. But then, on step T23, the physical meter glitches again and pops back to 5.
Oh boy.
And suddenly, the robot's belief shoots right back up to full power, as if by magic. The robot's entire worldview is wildly, violently oscillating between full life and complete death based on a momentary, temporary blip in the hardware.
In engineering terms, we call this a transient failure. It's a temporary glitch. To prevent this psychotic oscillation, our mathematical models must be taught to explicitly include the possibility of complete hardware failure. We have to introduce what is known as a transient failure model directly into the sensor's programming.
We have to teach it that sensors break.
We essentially tell the algorithm, listen, regardless of what the true battery level actually is, there is a flat underlying 3% chance that this sensor will just output absolute random nonsense.
It perfectly mimics human reasoning. If I am driving my car up a really steep incline and my analog fuel gauge suddenly plummets from half full to completely empty, I don't panic, pull over to the side of the highway, and call a tow truck.
Of course not.
My human brain knows that the gasoline is simply sloshing to the back of the tank, away from the sensor float. I instinctively use the inertia of my past beliefs, the hard fact that I just paid $40 to fill the tank an hour ago, to completely ignore the temporary, terrifying blip on the dashboard gauge.
And when we program the robot with that transient failure model, its mathematical belief state develops that exact same stabilizing inertia. Let's rerun the scenario. The robot sits idle. T1 to T20 reads 5. At T21, the meter reads 0. Now, instead of panicking, the robot analyzes the math.
What does it conclude?
It says, my deep history tells me I have been full for 20 minutes. I haven't moved. The laws of physics dictate batteries don't instantly drain. Given the 3% chance of a random glitch we programmed in, it is mathematically far more likely that the sensor simply glitched than the battery magically died. It maintains its high belief in the battery, gracefully ignoring the blip.
Perfect. The AI acts like a rational human. Problem solved. We can all go home.
Not quite. Because that solution only covers a temporary glitch. What if the physical failure is persistent? What if a wire physically snaps? Let's say the meter reads 0 on step T21 and then stays at 0 for step T22, T23, T24, and remains at 0 forever. What happens to our supposedly rational robot?
Oh, right. I see the flaw. If we only equipped it with a transient failure model, which expects glitches to be short-lived, the robot looks at the first 0 and thinks, glitch. It looks at the second 0 and thinks, wow, another glitch.
It's stubborn.
But eventually, after 5, 10, or 20 zeros in a row, the sheer accumulated mathematical weight of the evidence overrides the inertia of the past. The robot slowly, inexorably becomes convinced that the battery truly actually is empty, and it shuts itself down. It still fails.
Exactly. Even though the sensor is just permanently severely broken, the algorithm eventually capitulates to the false data. To handle this reality, we have to increase the complexity of the dynamic Bayesian network. We must augment the model by adding yet another hidden state variable, a specific status variable called meter broken. And crucially, we give this specific variable a persistence arc in the transition model.
Meaning, we tell the math that once the meter breaks, it stays broken. It doesn't magically fix itself.
Precisely. We program the AI with the understanding that there is a tiny fractional chance the meter breaks in any given second of operation. But if that break occurs, the sensor will constantly and persistently output 0 forever, regardless of the actual battery power. Now let's run the exact same catastrophic scenario a third time. 20 consecutive readings of 5, followed by an endless, unbroken sequence of zeros.
How does the robot process the reality now?
After the first 0 arrives at T21, the robot suspects a transient glitch. After the second 0 arrives at T22, the internal mathematical probability that the meter is physically broken spikes dramatically. By the time the fifth 0 arrives at T25, the robot's internal math is nearly 100% certain that the physical meter is permanently broken.
And what does it believe about its actual battery level?
This is the genius of the architecture. Because the algorithm now mathematically knows the meter is broken, it entirely severs its trust in the sensor. It completely ignores all subsequent 0 readings.
It learns to doubt its own eyes.
Instead, to survive, it relies purely on its internal, unupdated prediction engine. It simply assumes the battery is steadily discharging at the normal, expected, mathematically calculated rate for a robot sitting idle. It doesn't panic. It doesn't shut down. It continues to behave rationally and predictably in the face of a persistent, permanent hardware failure.
That sequence of logic is just incredible to me. We are literally giving an algorithm a mathematical model of its own fallibility. We teach it to doubt its own eyes. So dynamic Bayesian networks can achieve all this nuanced, layered reasoning. They seem like the ultimate, flawless tool for modeling reality. Is there a catch? We seem to always hit a wall eventually.
We do hit a wall, and it is the steepest one yet, the absolute computational wall. When you construct these highly complex DBNs with multiple interacting state variables, position, velocity, battery level, meter status, transient errors, persistent errors, exact mathematical inference becomes computationally suffocating.
The research talks about a process called unrolling. If we want to evaluate a complex sequence of, say, 50 time steps, the algorithm essentially has to copy-paste the intricate structure of the DBN 50 times, linking all those copies together chronologically into one massive static Bayesian network. And then it just uses standard brute force exact inference algorithms like variable elimination to solve the math.
And theoretically, mathematically, unrolling works. You can even employ clever programming tricks to ensure the computer only keeps two specific time slices in active memory at once to save RAM. But the bad news, the inescapable reality, is that the pure processing time it takes to compute the exact absolute probabilities at each step grows exponentially in relation to the number of state variables in the network.
The mega variable problem is back.
As the algorithm tries to eliminate variables to solve the equations, the mathematical factors grow to include all the interconnected states simultaneously. The maximum size of these mathematical factors becomes astronomically huge. So the paradox is this. Even though DBNs are architecturally brilliant at concisely representing complex, sparsely connected worlds, our computers simply cannot logically reason about them efficiently and exactly in real time.
So we have the perfect map of reality, but it's too heavy to unroll. We hit the computational wall. Exact inference is practically impossible for complex real-world DBNs. What do the engineers do? They cheat. Or rather, they approximate. And that brings us to what might be the most fascinating paradigm shift in the entire text particle filtering. How do we get around this suffocating math? We abandon exactness and rely on the brutal efficiency of survival of the fittest.
Particle filtering is a deeply ingenious approximate inference algorithm. Instead of trying to calculate the exact perfect probability distribution across millions or billions of possible interlocking states, which requires tracking an exponential number of mathematical possibilities, we use a fixed, strictly limited population of digital samples. We refer to these samples mathematically as particles.
I absolutely love the analogy of digital clones for this concept. It makes the math so visual. Let's say we are trying to track our autonomous robot as it moves through a complex environment. Instead of doing the exact suffocating math of the DBN, we boot up a simulation and generate a massive crowd of, say, 1,000 digital clones of the robot. We initialize the simulation by scattering these 1,000 clones randomly across the digital map, distributing them based on our best prior belief of where the real robot might actually be. Then, as time ticks forward, we run a continuous update cycle consisting of 3 distinct steps: propagate, wait, and resample.
Let's break those down. Step 1 is propagate. We push each individual clone one step forward in time. We look at clone number 1's current position and velocity in the simulation, and we sample a new projected position for it based on the transition model, the physics engine. We add a little random noise representing a gust of wind or a motor twitch. We repeat this process for all 1,000 clones independently. Every single clone takes a semi-random step into the future based on what it thinks the physics of the world dictate.
That's the movement. Now, step 2. Wait. Back in the real world, the actual physical robot sensors ping, and we receive a new piece of evidence, a new camera frame, a new laser reading. Now, we evaluate our digital clones against that hard evidence. Let's say clone number 432 is currently standing right next to a solid wall in the digital simulation, and the real robot sensor data comes back and says, I see a wall 3 inches in front of me. Because clone number 432's digital reality perfectly matches the real-world evidence, clone number 432 is awarded a very heavy mathematical weight. It is deemed highly accurate.
But let's look at clone number 99. Clone number 99 has wandered into the middle of a wide-open, empty room in the simulation. When the real robot reports seeing a wall, clone number 99's reality is completely contradicted. It is hallucinating. Therefore, clone number 99 is assigned a tiny, almost zero weight.
And here is the critical juncture. If the algorithm simply stopped there, if we just propagated the clones and weighted them indefinitely, the entire system would rapidly fail. If you just propagate and wait over a long enough time sequence, almost all of your 1,000 clones will inevitably wander off into highly improbable or physically impossible scenarios due to the accumulation of random noise. Only a tiny microscopic fraction of the clones will accidentally manage to mirror reality over a long duration. To maintain any semblance of accuracy without resampling, you would need an exponentially massive, computationally impossible number of clones. So, to save the system, we introduce step 3.
Resample. The application of evolutionary biology to computer science. We execute the survival of the fittest. To start the next time slice, we generate a brand new population of 1,000 clones. But we don't scatter them randomly. We reach into the current weighted pool of clones and pull them out one by one with the replacement. But we bias our selection heavily toward the clones possessing the largest mathematical weights.
This step is the true genius of the algorithm. The bad guesses, like clone number 99 sitting in the empty room with its near-zero weight, are simply not selected for the next generation. They die off. They are purged from the system. But the good guesses, the highly weighted clones whose digital reality matched the physical sensors, like clone number 432, are replicated. Because of its heavy weight, clone number 432 might get pulled from the pool and copied 10 or 15 times into the new generation. So we begin the next time step with a fresh population of 1,000 completely unweighted clones, but that entire population is now heavily, densely concentrated exclusively in the high probability areas of the state space.
So practically speaking, what does this evolutionary culling mean for the computer's processing power?
It means we completely stop wasting precious CPU cycles calculating the exact mathematical probability of scenarios that are obviously false. We stop doing math on Clone 99. We violently focus all of our limited computational resources only on the highly probable areas of reality. The bad guesses are constantly ruthlessly pruned every fraction of a second. As a direct result, the particle filtering algorithm can maintain a highly accurate, incredibly robust approximation of the true probability distribution using a strictly constant, manageable number of samples. It runs perfectly in real time no matter how complex the DBN is and no matter how long the sequence of time gets.
I found a detail in the research fascinating. The mathematics prove that the fraction of samples remaining close to reality drops exponentially fast if you do not perform that resampling step. The resampling, the continuous violent culling of the weak predictions, is the only thing that forces the simulation to aggressively shadow the actual chaotic real world.
It truly is an elegant solution, and it has completely revolutionized incredibly complex fields ranging from advanced computer vision to autonomous robotics, and it succeeds because it handles extreme nonlinearities and chaotic non-Gaussian distributions flawlessly. The particle filter doesn't care if the probability distribution is messy or has multiple separated peaks. Imagine a scenario where the robot's sensors indicate its lost keys could be either sitting on the kitchen counter or sitting inside the car parked in the driveway, but absolutely nowhere else. A Kalman filter would try to draw one giant bell curve between the two, guessing the keys are floating in the air halfway between the house and the car. A particle filter doesn't do that. The clones simply congregate into two dense, separate populations, one swarm of clones on the counter and one swarm of clones in the car, leaving the empty physical space between them completely devoid of computational effort. It mirrors reality perfectly.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground, and we're entering the final stretch. We need to touch on the ultimate headache that plagues engineers in this field. We have spent an hour talking about tracking one robot, one bird, one blip on a screen. But what happens when reality forces us to track multiple objects simultaneously and they look identical? The research refers to this as identity uncertainty, or the data association problem.
This is a notoriously massive, computationally terrifying problem and feels like air traffic control and military radar tracking. Let's build a scenario. You are staring at a radar screen. At time t, you see two distinct blips on the screen. Let's call them plane A at coordinate 1, one plane B at coordinate 2, 2. At time t+1, the radar sweeps again, and you see two blips in slightly new positions. The fundamental problem is this. The radar doesn't transmit name tags. Which of the new blips is plane A and which is plane B?
Right. If plane A and plane B are flying toward each other, and their trajectories cross perfectly on the screen at the exact moment the radar sweeps, how does the computer know what happened? Did plane A pass smoothly over plane B and continue straight? Or did they execute evasive maneuvers and bounce off each other's trajectories? The raw data just shows blips.
Exactly. The labeling of the blips is entirely arbitrary to the sensor. To maintain an accurate mathematical model of the sky, the algorithm cannot just guess. It has to mathematically sum the probabilities over all possible ways of associating the incoming observations with the known objects.
The research refers to this mathematically as the n factorial problem. Let's explain what that kind of growth actually looks like.
Certainly. If you're tracking n number of objects, there are n factorial possible mathematical assignments of those observations to those objects at every single time step. If you have two planes, it's 2 factorial, which is just two possible combinations. Very easy. But let's say an air traffic controller is tracking 10 planes. 10 factorial is roughly 3.6 million possible combinations of identities. And that is just for one single sweep of the radar. If you were trying to calculate the Viterbi path over t number of time steps, the number of possible association histories becomes n factorial to the power of t. As the number of objects grows from 2 to 10 to 100, the number of combinations grows factorially, which is a growth rate that makes exponential growth look slow. It completely, utterly blows up the standard temporal models we've discussed today. To solve it requires layering entirely new, massive architectures of probabilistic reasoning on top of the Kalman filters, usually involving generating hundreds of hypothetical tracks, scoring them, and aggressively pruning the unlikely ones before the math completely chokes the computer's memory.
Wow. Okay, let's take a long breath and try to recap this incredible journey we've been on. We started in that dark, windowless room with a security guard, relying on nothing but an imperfect umbrella sensor to guess the weather. We learned how to mathematically slice the continuous flow of time, using Markov assumptions to restrict our vision to the recent past and prevent our algorithms from choking on the infinite history of the universe. We explored the four foundational pillars, filtering the present to know where we are, predicting the future, smoothing out our understanding of the past using hindsight, and finding the singular, most likely explanation of events using the Viterbi algorithm.
We observed the stark mathematical elegance of hidden Markov models, how they compress reality into a single megavariable, allowing us to reduce complex temporal inference to incredibly fast, simple matrix multiplications. And we saw how that matrix math empowers a lost vacuum robot to perfectly localize itself within a maze, systematically overriding a staggering 59% sensor error rate by relying on the rigid laws of physics.
Then we shattered that discrete grid and moved into the fluid, continuous world, introducing the Kalman filter. We unpacked the magic of linear Gaussian mechanics, which guarantees that a clean bell curve of probability perfectly maintains its shape through time. We explored how the Kalman gain acts as a mathematical judge, automatically weighing trust between internal predictions and nosy sensors. We expanded that into dynamic Bayesian networks, breaking complex, chaotic worlds down into sparse, factored variables. And we saw exactly why an algorithm desperately needs a persistent failure model so it doesn't experience a mathematical panic attack over a broken battery meter.
And finally, we circumvented the suffocating computational wall of exact DBN inference by embracing approximation. We used particle filtering, propagating, weighting, and aggressively resampling a digital population of clones, utilizing the brutal efficiency of evolutionary survival to approximate reality in real time, no matter how complex the environment became.
So, as we wrap up, I want to address you, the learner, directly. Why does any of this matter to you? Why did we just spend an hour deep in the weeds of transition models, probability matrices, and factorial math? Because I promise you this is not abstract academic theory. This is the exact, literal mathematical foundation for how the modern automated world operates around you. When an autonomous vehicle navigates a busy city intersection, seeing the world through its LiDAR and cameras, it is constantly running these exact particle filters to determine where pedestrians are and where they are moving. When your smartphone's speech recognition software tries to understand your voice in a crowded room, it is actively using a variant of the Viterbi algorithm to mathematically deduce the most likely sequence of words you spoke. When quantitative economists attempt to track the momentum of global markets through the deafening noise of daily high-frequency trading, they are relying on these temporal probability models. This is the fundamental language of how machines perceive time.
And understanding that language raises an incredibly important question, a final, somewhat provocative thought I want to leave the listener to ponder today. We spent a significant amount of time in this deep dive analyzing the battery dilemma, discussing exactly how and why a robot critically needs a persistent failure model. We saw clearly that if an intelligent agent only expects transient, temporary glitches, a permanently broken sensor will eventually, inevitably convince it of a totally false reality, like a robot believing its battery is completely dead when it is actually fully charged. The robot required a higher level state variable, a meta-awareness, to look at the data and realize, my sensor is physically broken. I should no longer trust the stream of information.
It had to explicitly mathematically model its own capacity for fallibility to survive.
Exactly. Now, consider human beings in the modern information age. Our brains are, at their core, massive organic prediction engines running incredibly similar probabilistic models. Every day we filter the present, predict the near future, and smooth our memories of the past based on the stream of evidence we receive. But what about our sensors? Today, our primary sensors for understanding the world outside our immediate physical vicinity are our social media feeds, our highly curated news sources, our algorithmic echo chambers, and even our own deeply ingrained cognitive biases. What happens when those societal sensors experience a persistent failure? If an algorithm is designed to feed us a constant, unbroken stream of distorted, hyperpolarized, fundamentally inaccurate reality, do we have the mental architecture to recognize it?
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying parallel.
If we lack a robust, persistent failure model for our own modern information sources, Do we, exactly like that badly programmed battery robot, just slowly, unquestioningly adapt our internal beliefs to completely align with a mathematically false reality? Or can we step back, evaluate the persistence of the distortion, recognize the noise, and say, my sensor is broken. I need to sever my trust in this feed and rely on my internal baseline of rational truth? It is at its core a computational problem of probability, but it is also a profoundly, urgently human one.
That is an absolutely incredible note to end on. It's a reminder that you constantly need to question your own transition models and rigorously audit the sensors you trust. Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive journey through time, probability, matrix math, and perception. Keep questioning the evidence, watch out for permanently broken meters, and we will see you on the next deep dive.